In the cold heart of the Tower of London, on a dim February morning in 1478, the life of a man born into royalty ended not with the swing of a sword, but, so legend claims, with a gurgling breath beneath the surface of a barrel filled with sweet, intoxicating wine. This is the story of George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence, brother to two kings, beloved heir, traitor, and tragic figure. His tale is one of ambition, betrayal, and a strange, lingering end that history still whispers about in dark corners. So sit tight as we dive into today's mystery, and you will have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. George was born into chaos on October 21, 1449, in Dublin. His father, Richard, 3rd Duke of York, served as Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, and his mother, Cecily Neville, was of the powerful Northern Neville family. George was their 9th child in 10 years, a middle son in a family destined to be torn apart by one of England's bloodiest dynasty conflicts, the Wars of the Roses. As a boy, George knew neither peace nor permanence. In 1459, at the age of 10, he watched helplessly as his world was upended. At Ludlow, where his father and older brothers fled from a royal army, George was left behind with his mother and younger siblings. The town and its castle were sacked, and George was handed over to the custody of his aunt, his fate hanging in the balance. But in war, fortunes turned swiftly. A year later, his father was declared heir to the throne, only to die at the Battle of Wakefield days later. Now fatherless, George and his younger brother Richard, the future Richard III, were exiled to the court of Burgundy. Isolated and uncertain, they spent lonely months far from home, wondering if their family would survive. Then, everything changed again. Their eldest brother, Edward, seized the throne and became Edward IV, the first Yorkist king. At just 11 years old, George was suddenly catapulted into the royal spotlight. His brother Edmund had died alongside their father, making George the new heir. Edward welcomed his younger brothers back to England, and George was created Duke of Clarence, a title rich with symbolism and political weight, designed to bolster Yorkist legitimacy. For nearly a decade, George stood just behind the throne. But being so close to power, yet forever second to it, bred a restlessness within him. George was a prince raised in uncertainty, and he became a man plagued by ambition and suspicion. Enter Richard Neville, the Earl of Warwick, the Kingmaker. Warwick was a towering figure of the era, a cousin to George, and the very man who had helped Edward claim the throne. But Edward and Warwick were destined to clash, and George would find himself caught in the middle. Warwick saw George as a means to an end. Lacking a male heir, he offered his daughter, Isabel, as a bride. Edward refused the match, wary of Warwick's growing influence. But George defied him. In July 1469, in a defiant ceremony at Calais, George married Isabel without the king's blessing. This act of rebellion set in motion a series of betrayals. George joined Warwick in open revolt. They even captured Edward and held him prisoner for a time. But rebellions rarely go as planned. When Warwick ultimately turned to his former enemies, the Lancastrians, George realized he had been outmaneuvered. His dreams of power evaporated. The man who had once plotted to replace his brother now came crawling back. In a twist worthy of Shakespeare, Edward forgave him. For a time, the brothers were reconciled. George returned to court, Isabel by his side, and they had two surviving children, Margaret and Edward. But the scars of rebellion never fully healed. And when Isabel died in 1476, barely 3 months after the death of their infant son, George's mind began to unravel. Grief turned to paranoia. Just 4 months after Isabel's death, George accused one of her ladies of poisoning her. Without authority, he arrested, tried, and had the woman executed. It was a blatant abuse of power, one that Edward could no longer ignore. When George stormed into a council meeting, railing against conspiracies and accusing courtiers, it was the last straw. Edward ordered his brother arrested. The final betrayal had come. In January 1478, George stood trial for treason. The charges were serious: plotting against the king, attempting to send his son abroad, and, most damningly, retaining a document proclaiming himself heir to the Lancastrian line. Parliament, under Edward's control, found him guilty. There would be no public execution, no spectacle. He was a duke, a brother to the king, and his death would be kept behind closed doors. But it's here that the legend begins. On February 18, 1478, George Plantagenet, Duke of Clarence, was executed. The official records are silent on the method. Yet a peculiar tale emerged and endured, that George was drowned in a vat of Malmsey wine. Why this story? Some say it was his own choice, permitted the dignity of selecting his fate. Others believe it was symbolic. Edward, himself rumored to enjoy the drink, mockingly sending his brother to death in a wine barrel. There were even whispers that it was meant to avoid shedding royal blood, a matter of sacred taboo in some traditions. George's daughter, Margaret Pole, would one day become the Countess of Salisbury and the last Plantagenet. She wore, it is said, a charm shaped like a barrel on her bracelet, a subtle, silent tribute to the father she barely knew, and whose death was cloaked in myth. The Wars of the Roses raged on after George's death. His brother Richard took the crown after Edward's passing, only to fall at Bosworth Field in 1485. The victor, Henry Tudor, married Edward Ivy's daughter and united the warring houses as Henry VII. But the story of George, the brother who might have been king, who rebelled and repented, who died in wine and legend, has never quite faded. It is a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, even blood cannot guarantee mercy. Feel free to leave your comments below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more mysteries like this. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.